We're back with another college football rundown here on the podcast. I've got Mike Zanetti joining me on this college football rundown. I'm so stoked for this one. We're gearing up for the last couple of weeks of the college football season. How are the rankings going to pan out for the college football playoff? What do we expect to see from the group of five? Who's the Heisman frontrunners? Who's pretenders? Who's contenders? What do we expect to see? And how much are you, the fans, excited about the chaos that's about to erupt in the college football rankings in the next 3 weeks? We've got all this and more today on the Gametime Guru. So,
what time is it? Game time!
This is the Gametime Guru podcast, where I interview sports figures from all over the world to help deliver a panoramic view on sports. So whether you're a former athlete, one of the crazies, or simply a casual sports fan, this is the perfect show for you as we peel back the curtains and learn from our guests every single week. I'm your host, Shane Larson, and I'm helping you see sports through a different lens. What's up, everybody? Welcome out to another episode of the Gametime Guru podcast. As you guys know, last month we chatted about this and how we were going to be doing this segment a couple times this year. I'm going to be bringing back on Mike Zanetti. We're going to be chatting about college football, do a little bit more relevant information right now about the current state of college football and what we're doing, what we're excited for coming up this week and moving forward towards the college football playoff. So, Mike, thanks for joining me again, man.
Yeah, it's awesome, Shane. I appreciate you having me.
Heck yeah. So shout out to Nation's Best Football, too. I want to make sure we remind everybody it's being brought to you by Nation's Best. Go check them out. I'll link them here in the description. I want to shout out Bob Smith for all the support since the last 6-7 years working alongside him. So Mike, since the last time we chatted, there's been a couple of there's been some movement, some exciting movement in college football. And first I want to talk about the Heisman watch. We're going to get right to the Heisman watch real quick because last time we chatted about it, we were talking about Cam Ward. We were talking about Ashton Jeanty, obviously Travis Hunter. And there's some questions I have for you here. Who do you currently have in the front runner for the Heisman at this point with just a couple weeks left in the regular season?
It's so tough because, the way I look at the Heisman race, it's like one bad game in college, you just fall off the rankings. And it happened to Ashton Jeanty. Right now, the clear-cut front runner is Travis Hunter. And I can't disagree. I'm going to have to say Travis. I know it's your clear cookie-cutter answer, but Hunter has been – and I personally don't think quarterback should just be that much higher because of the position of need. But Hunter is a two-way player. He's playing lockdown cornerback, wide receiver. He made a fantastic catch last week on fourth down. It's between him and Jeanty. I think you can argue Dylan Gabriel, but for me, it's just a matter of who can perform at a higher rate. And that's the thing. Hunter didn't even have the best receiving day, but he's probably one of the best corners, if not the best corner in the class. So Hunter's been a beast, but I think it's between him and Jeanty. It's going to be a close race.
It's funny because I was talking with some guys from my job today for my full-time work, and we're chatting about it. And the argument is being made across the board about Hunter so as a Biletnikoff Award voter, we just got the polls out, and I was voting for the best wide receiver. And Hunter's not even a top 10 wide receiver in the country, right? He's not even a top 10 statistically, anything of that nature. And at corner, he's not even ranked the top corner necessarily. But it's hard. It's really hard to rank corners because typically you're not going to get a lot of stats if you're a good corner because they're not going to throw the ball your way. And when they do, you're going to get tackles, you're going to get deflections, and you're going to get interceptions. And I feel like when they do throw the ball his way, he does a pretty good job at getting involved with the pass. So I am of the opinion that Hunter is, and this is speaking from a Boise State alum, I think he's the front runner. I'm right there with you, Mike. I agree with that. But the argument's being made of what is the award for the Heisman? Is it the best football players? Is it the most valuable to their team? Who is it? Because he's not even top 10 receiver. So just because he's a two-way player, people are saying, just because he's a two-way player, that's great. But he's not even like an elite receiver. I think he's the best receiver on their team. And he opens up the field. So he's very valuable to their team because he opens up the field for the other receivers as well. He gets double teams all the time, shifts up the entire game plan for the defense. But it's a weird conversation. And the one thing that works to their benefit is that they're winning now. Colorado's winning.
Yep.
And I think that plays to his strengths. I do want to follow up with this question, though. I know we mentioned, it's between him and Jeanty at the moment. I mean, I've been watching every one of Jeanty's games. They're starting to stack the box on him. It's hard for him to have a great game every game because there's 8-9 guys in the box. But he still had another 3-touchdown, 150-plus yard performance against San Jose on the road. But Dillon Gabriel, I find it funny that Dillon Gabriel is, and I mean this respectfully, he's up there in the top 4 or 5. Some of them have him number 3 on the board. But then I go over to my Buckeyes, and Will Howard, who almost has identical statistics to Dillon Gabriel, isn't even on any sort of watch, right? Dillon Gabriel's had one extra game. He's got 600 more yards passing, but they're essentially identicals. Completion percentage, touchdowns, rushing, it's almost identical. What are your thoughts on that? Because Will Howard is playing just as high a level ball. He's just not flashy, right? And the team is number 2 in the country. What are your thoughts on that particular piece?
I love how you mentioned that the Heisman, we don't really know what to define it as, because like, is it most valuable player or is it the flashiest player, like you said? So I think I can make a comparison last year, how Jaden Daniels won the Heisman. I can argue we should have went to Penix. But besides the point, Gabriel is, like you said, the flashier quarterback. He runs. Will Howard, and he runs too, but he's more of a pocket passing guy, and he doesn't get credit for all the runs he makes. So for me, it's tough because, like, you look at all these quarterbacks, I think a lot of them are playing pretty well. Cam Ward, Curtis Rourke on Indiana, but I think they all mesh together, and there's not really, for me, one that kind of stands out from others. I think you can argue a conversation for Gabriel or Howard, but for me, there's not really that quarterback. Every year there's a quarterback that stands out, and it's like the Joe Burrow or the Kyler Murray. To me, I'm like, I can't really put my finger on it this year. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's also what's exciting about college football, though, right? Because there's some parity there. There's good quarterback play across the board, but there's not one that's like separating themselves in the pack, so to speak. But there are some good high-level quality quarterback play going around right now. You mentioned Indiana. Going into this week, you got Ohio State, Indiana. Now, I don't want to jinx it because last time we talked, it was the week of the Ohio State-Oregon game. I headed down to Eugene, watched the Oregon-Ohio State game. I was down there for that experience. Same thing this week, though. We're chatting before another big game, top 5 matchup between Indiana and Ohio State. This one, as a Buckeyes fan, actually has me more worried than the Oregon game because
I agree. Yes.
I don't know. I want to get your thoughts on this, man. What do you think happens? Does Indiana come in there and make the upset into Columbus this weekend?
It's such a tough game. It's got to be who you got, right? Like Indiana, Ohio State, and a lot of people are like, Indiana's fraudulent. They've had this easy schedule, and granted, they haven't really played anyone spectacular, but I really think they could hang in there versus Ohio State. It's definitely like here's the thing. Indiana has not ever been known as a football program. They've always been more of a basketball school, and to see them in the top 5 for the first time in a while, it's kind of crazy. So there's a good possibility they could get blown out because they haven't played anyone. But at the same time, I could see them hang in there till like the 3rd or 4th quarter, kind of like the Oregon prediction, and Ohio State should pull away. It's really been the Indiana offense that has showed out this year.
Yeah, the offense is putting up crazy points. They're well coached. They believe, and that's one of the things about this Indiana team, in my opinion, is they believe in what they're doing. They believe in their coach. They rally behind each other. Like, it's pretty cool to watch. In the Michigan game, which was their closest matchup, 2015 was a final there, but they're playing a very physical Michigan team who controls the ball, and they're not very flashy, and they have a very stout defense, and they still pulled that one off, that was the one I was worried about the most. I'm like, I wonder if they'll get past Michigan. Michigan's on a down year, but they're still very physical, very talented with a very good defense. And they still got past them. And the other thing that I'm looking at, they haven't played, I would say they haven't played as tough of a schedule as Ohio State. However, they do have a common opponent in Nebraska they've got a couple of common opponents, but Nebraska is the one that kind of shows everybody, you look at Indiana. I think Indiana beat them, 50-something to 7?
56, yeah.
Yeah, 56-7. And Ohio State struggled against Nebraska. Now, that's the thing about Ohio State. They're not a great, it's not like they have a home field advantage. I've been to a couple games at Columbus. It's awesome, great atmosphere for the most part, but it's a noon Eastern kickoff. Everybody who goes to Ohio State, they'll pack at 106,000 fans in the stadium, but you don't feel like it's 106, like, because the fans aren't as crazy. It's not like this crazy home field advantage. They don't tend to like play up, when they go at home. And so I have this feeling that like it's going to be one of those weird games when they're at home against Indiana, and they got to come out swinging fast. I think Will Howard's got to play elite level football. I think Ohio State's got to run the ball and control the clock and push them around. I think they have better athletes. I'll say that. Ohio State does have better athletes. They're bigger, stronger, faster. They've got to show that, though, and they got to put a full game together.
I would agree. Yes, you look at Indiana, like you said, their kind of first test, if you would, it was Michigan, and it comes down to, it's a weird one, right? Any given Saturday, you could catch them on a bad week. Ohio State coming off 2 blowout games, so do they? Maybe, but it should be a good one. I feel like Indiana's held their own. They've proven offensively that they can do it, and it's just about, like you said, the better team is Ohio State. They have the better upfront, talented guys. It's that maybe Indiana catches them on a weird week. You never know.
I sure hope Ohio State doesn't get caught sleeping. That's all I hope. I hope they can finish strong. So I would love to see a Buckeyes Ducks Big Ten championship game rematch as they get ready for the college football playoff. But we'll see. I mean, you got to get through it first. You got to win the games on your schedule. Now, looking at the playoff, this last weekend, Mike, BYU goes down to Kansas. Kansas comes over to Provo, Utah, defeats BYU on the road in a pretty hectic game. But Kansas has been, a 3-win team goes in there and beats BYU. But it's not that surprising to me. At least anybody who paid attention to Kansas knew that they're 4 games within a score. They could have had 7 wins this year easy. Like, it's just they're a pretty good football program. They just weren't winning close games. Go in there and they beat them. And that shifts up the entire landscape for the college football playoff and the Big 12 and everything. Now the Big 12's got this match. You've got BYU, you've got Arizona State, you've got Colorado, all of these teams fighting for the 1-2 seed to play in the championship, which would potentially obviously give them the berth to the playoff. Who do you got in the Big 12, man? Like, BYU's going to be playing Arizona State. Like, there's a couple big time games coming. Colorado going to Kansas. I mean, the Big 12 could get shook up pretty good. What do you got coming in on the Big 12 side of things?
I got to tell you, I love BYU, but I did expect them to lose. And it's hard to say that, but after a barely kind of win versus Utah the week before, they had to come back down big. Well, not big, but it was a rough game. And after a Big 12 matchup, you go back another one, Kansas. They've held their own against Kansas State, Arizona, like all these teams. So I would say Colorado should win it. They've proven offensively that they have probably the best offense in the Big 12. For me, like, there's not really a gap. BYU has been dominant because of their defense. And if Retzlaff can get going, maybe, but I don't trust that offense to keep up with Colorado. And it's weird because Colorado has had some weird gimmicks as well, to where they started off slow. And even last game they played, who was it? They played Utah, and Shedeur threw a pick on the first drive, and they kept inching their way back in. They were following the spread, but then eventually the offense takes away. And that's what I think you can take away from this Colorado team, is that offensively they outrank anyone in the Big 12.
It's a good point. I am curious to see that. It's such an interesting team. I do have a lot of respect for Coach Prime. Got a lot of respect for Sanders and Hunter, obviously, but there's times where, like, I think Sanders is by far the best. Well, I shouldn't say by far, but he is one of the best quarterbacks in college football. But he has a tendency, Mike, in my opinion, like, he moves backwards a little bit. He goes back really far. He stays flat-footed because he banks on his arm strength. And sometimes I'm like, dude, he doesn't move up in the pocket as well as I think he should. So it's kind of awkward how he gets the ball off sometimes. I have a feeling he's going to meet his match one of these games where they're going to just get right after him, because he does, when they get good pass rush on him and they get penetration into the backfield, he doesn't really escape a lot. People forget that they've given up quite a few sacks. And so, I mean, not as many as last year, but still, I don't know. Colorado is such an interesting team to me. But
if they've had to meet their match, I would say it would be BYU. Like if they've had the defense to do it, it's BYU. But I love that you mentioned the Shedeur because the comp I have, and it's really, really ugly, but it's Deshaun Watson on Clemson. Like the guy would dance around, even on Houston, he would just dance in the pocket and just like you see it in the Utah game, he's going around the field in the backfield, just running away. And I don't understand it, but that right there is where you talk about flashy plays. And it's like, that could get you in trouble. It's not like it's lucky at that point. So it's tough.
So to your point, though, and people are going to hate on that. They'll hear this clip and they'll probably hate on it, but it's true to a certain degree. You know, if people go back in time and watch Josh Allen, Josh Allen at Wyoming before he was drafted to the NFL, I had to watch him multiple times because he beat BSU and it pissed me off. And that's what happened with him. He was not a good college quarterback. People think he was this amazing. No, he wasn't. He was terrible. The way he got so many big plays off of scrambling, running around. And when you're doing that and you can avoid the defense, your corners are left out to dry on the defensive side of the ball because your receivers have all this time to get out in space. You can only guard guys at that level for so long. And it's just hard. And he was launching passes, like just launching them, playing 500 like you did at recess. And Josh Allen would just throw him into the end zone and hope for the best, right? And like he got all these big time plays, and then they drafted him because of his arm strength. Now, has he proven me wrong in the NFL? Yes, he has. But sometimes that doesn't like work all the time. And I feel like Sanders does get away with it. Sometimes he runs around, zigzag, and then you've got these three really, really high level receivers that are out there in space, and he can find them that way. But if you can actually like contain Sanders, it's not always that easy. And so if you get the right defensive line and defensive front to contain him, it changes everything completely. So anyway, it's just funny. I'm going to get ragdolled on that one too because of my comparison with Josh Allen. But
no, I love it because like fans love the flashy plays. They, Johnny Manziel, Tim Tebow, even though they may have done a lot of things wrong, there was still a lot to love, and that was what it was.
100%, man, 100%. So here's the conversation that's being had now, and it's regarding the SEC. Okay, so Mike, we're looking at 12 teams, a 12-team format. We've talked about how this wasn't going to be this easy, discussion. Like everyone thought it was going to be we got 12 teams. Everybody who deserves it's going to get in. It's going to be so much better than the 14 playoff. We talked about this a month ago about how, no, it's probably going to cause a lot of conflict. Well, now we're looking at the SEC. Dude, there are so many teams in the SEC with 2 losses, and the conversation's being had again about how many of these teams deserve to go to the playoff. Like, I heard one guy talking on Twitter saying 8 teams in the SEC could beat Penn State on a neutral field, right? Like they're making that argument of like all these 8 teams could beat Penn State on a neutral field. And they went down the line: Texas, Texas A&M, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, even potentially Missouri and LSU, they said could beat Penn State on a neutral field. Now, do they have an argument? Yeah, possibly. But so now we're going to get into this discussion of like who gets in, right? Like who's getting in and who's definitely getting left out. And is it going to really be the top 12 teams? What are your thoughts here, man?
I don't know if it matters what I think, because the committee is going to be what the committee does. And they're going to, we talked about this a month ago, somebody's going to get left out. Who is it? And I would agree. Like you have the argument there. I don't think Penn State is that good. Like their defense keeps them in a lot of games. Now, granted, Drew Aller, it was Purdue, but they played well. It's so tough because the SEC, it's a lot. You got Bama, like even Georgia has battled. If they lose another game, maybe they get bumped out. There's still some football to play, and to hold it in with Tennessee. If Tennessee beat Georgia, that would have been something crazy. But of course, the better team is going to pull away in the end. And I mean, for me, I'm going to leave it up to the committee. It's like I could say I love the Gamecocks, I love Vanderbilt, just the way they play, but I don't think it matters if they're not top or if Bama or Georgia doesn't lose another game, because you have those 2-3 loss teams because of the name. They're going to get in regardless.
Yeah. See, I'm curious to see what happens. Let's just say like nothing changes and everybody wins out that's supposed to win out. Let's just say the Big 12 champion gets in, whoever it is so one of those teams has to lose. BYU, Colorado, or Arizona State will have to lose another game at some point. So someone's going to lose. Okay. let's just say the top 12 teams that are in there, plus the group of 5. If Boise State wins out, they're getting in, and they potentially get a 4 seed if they jump BYU. And so, or BYU, Colorado, if they stay ahead of them, they get a 4 seed instead of a 5 potentially. And so we're looking at it. Let's say Penn State and Indiana. Indiana, let's say they lose to Ohio State, but they win the rest of their games. And Penn State, and they finish in the top 10. Well, you got Penn State and Indiana in the top 10. You got Oregon, Ohio State. So there's 4 teams from the Big Ten just right there that could potentially be in that are ranked ahead of like 5 different SEC schools with 2 losses. And then you've got obviously the Big 12 champion. You got, Miami probably who gets in. And I just think you're going to have 5 or 6 teams that are left out with big names that are going to be really upset about this because they're going to feel like they could beat anybody. They're going to, we could beat Boise State on a neutral field. We could beat all these teams. And I think if the rankings stay the same, we're going to have the exact same frustrations. Now, who is the team? Who's a pretender? I want to know, in your opinion, who's the pretender?
All right. I got to ask you, big name or little name? How about that?
Let's start with a big name. Who's a big name pretender, in your opinion?
Big name pretender, I would probably, and I hate to do it to them, but it's Penn State, man. They have not proven anything special to me. And that game against Ohio State, it just proves to me that I know Ohio State's a dominant defense, but that offense couldn't do anything. And it's just like their defense is all they have going for them. They might win against Indiana, or they might get in as a top seed, and they might play like a Boise, or depending on where they fall. But like, they're not going to go far, and I just don't believe in it. It's tough because like it's them. Like Tennessee was arguably great for a while. I think the inexperience there with Nico is tough. You got Notre Dame with Riley Leonard, hasn't really shockingly beat anyone crazy. They beat A&M by 10 points. Again, like this is a really weird playoff picture because this year it seems like there is no team that kind of outweighs another, which is crazy. Like there's no Michigan, there's no dominant team that we're like, hey, that's a really good team. They're all pretty equal, so it's pretty tough.
Dude, that's such a good point. And yeah, we mentioned Notre Dame. I forgot to even put them in this mix. This is such a crazy playoff. I would agree with you on that. I was actually going to tell you that I was going to agree. It's either Penn State or Miami, in my opinion, that are the pretenders of the big schools. And I mean that respectfully. But one thing that I've noticed, Mike, and maybe you've noticed the same, I don't know, but with Big Ten schools, it's interesting with them because Ohio State's built a little differently than the typical Big Ten schools because they built their teams for speed, but that does work against them when the cold weather hits. And we've seen that against Michigan and with the snow flurries a couple of years back with CJ Stroud. Like they build their team for speed to compete with the SEC because they know that come playoff time, they have to fight the SEC schools. But when you're building your teams in the Midwest, you're building them for power football, defensive football, not very flashy. That only lasts so long because when you get matched up with speed, which we've seen against like Penn State facing schools like USC and then against the SEC, like they just can't hang. So like the Big Ten schools tend to struggle with the speed. That's just how it is. Like that's just how it always has been. And Ohio State is sort of an anomaly, but kind of not. I mean, they hung with Georgia. They've also gotten smoked by Bama. Like they're the ones who've tried to build themselves for the playoff, where some of the other teams build themselves for like regular season power within their conference. And so there's just a difference. Some teams like Ohio State builds for a championship, national championship. Others try to build for a conference championship. And it doesn't work that way. So I'm right there with you. Now, okay, here's a scenario that comes into play. So I said it earlier, Boise State has a potential, if they win out, to become the 4 seed. So they get a bye, and then they would play in the Fiesta Bowl potentially in that second round against the 5-12 winner. I want to know your thoughts, man. I know it's shaking up. It's shaking up the college football landscape.
I saw the biggest we're in trouble like bracket where it was Indiana, all these teams that were like what we never expected at the beginning of the year, like chaos in college football. So for me, I don't know why the committee loves Boise. I understand Jeanty, it's awesome, but they've had 2 weeks, even 3, slip away from them with just they should have lost those games. And obviously they pulled away versus the last week. But again, Nevada could have caught him. UNLV could have caught him. Like, there's so many games. Even if they do win out, I think they're going to get first round. Even if they win out and they're the 4th seed, I don't know, man. There's something about Boise to where it's like the group of 5 teams. I don't know why, but I don't want to discredit them. I just don't feel like they're enough.
Yeah. So it's interesting, I like hearing that perspective because of all the Boise State squads, I've gone to all the big games, all the they win the big games. Historically speaking, they beat Arizona, they beat TCU, they've beaten Oklahoma, they've done the big game thing. I was at the Georgia game when they beat Georgia. Like they Virginia Tech, same thing, 2010. But like, it's weird this year because they're leaning so heavily again with Ashton Jeanty. Their quarterback's like 5'8", dude. He's like a hobbit from the Shire. I love Maddox Madsen. He's a stud. Wears a visor, looks cool, but he's little. He's a little guy, and he can't see over the line. So his passes have to sail a little higher. He's had a lot of questionable passes. And then their secondary gets torched by good receivers. That's our demise. But then they find a way to win, and they're leaning on what I think happens with Boise State is they're leaning on that game against Oregon. And I think that's what the committee's seeing as well. Is they see it, that game against Oregon where they should have won. They should have beat Oregon in Oregon this year, lose it by a field goal, but they gave up 2 touchdowns on a special teams. Boise State, manhandled Oregon at the beginning of the year. They dominated that whole game. And my whole thing is though, that Oregon team that struggled at the beginning of the season is not the Oregon team that's here now. It's much different. They figured it out. Took them a little while with Gabriel to get his rhythm going and stuff. But I think that's why the committee loves Boise State so much. And this is coming from a Boise State fan. I love Boise State. I'll be happy to see them in the playoff. But I'm going to go back to this. If there's a team that they could beat, who would it be? Because there are some teams there. It's a toss-up this year. Who could they beat if they were matched up? Some say BYU. Some are talking hey, if they got matched up with a Penn State, or if they got matched up with an Ohio State who can't stop the run sometimes. What is there somebody on a neutral field, good weather football, so there's no weather involved with it because they'd be in a dome with the Fiesta Bowl. Who could they beat?
That's a good question. Because they're definitely capable of beating one of those Miami teams. I just think Miami's offense is too good. They can't keep up just trying to run it. It might be like a 48-45 game, but that's the type of game I think Miami – that would be the game. Miami, I wouldn't be surprised if the way Georgia's been so inconsistent. But I do agree with the Oregon take to where it's they started the season slow. They had a couple bad games. They are not the team that they were in the first 4 weeks of the season. And I want to touch on the pretenders because it's we could have easily said Georgia because they've been so inconsistent, but it wouldn't surprise me if they won the whole thing just because of it's Georgia,
Georgia that's such a good point, man. You see them you saw them their bad side against Bama, and then they dominated against Bama, and it's just out of nowhere, boom, boom, it's like a flip flop, right?
Yep.
And then we've seen the good, the bad, we've seen the Texas game, we've seen other games. They are so. I think it all starts with Beck. If Beck. Yeah, it just depends on what Beck you're going to get, and I think that's what it comes down to. What are your thoughts on with Georgia's head coach, right? Kirby going after it, saying, "Oh wait, oh my gosh, did I say that right? Did I say Kirby?
Kirby Smart.
Okay, I said Kirby, right?
Yes, you did.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, for some reason I'm thinking, did I say Herbie, like Herb Street?
Yeah.
I was like, did I say Kirby? Okay, Kirby talking about Georgia's strength of schedule. I feel like this, Mike. I feel like the last. Forever, they've been on the easiest side of the SEC, right? They've had a cakewalk through the SEC division, whereas Bama has had to go through the other side. It's always been the tough side. And finally, the 1 year that they scratched that, now Georgia's mad about the strength of schedule. Oh, it's so hard. I don't know, man. I try to give them credit because I don't dislike Georgia, but it's come on, what are we doing here? But maybe maybe you think differently. What are your thoughts on that?
I would love to see Georgia, Bama out. I would love to see them lose one. If they both lose one more game, I don't think they should make the playoffs because all these other teams like BYU are 1-loss teams, SMU 1-loss team, Colorado 2-3-loss team. They're 2-loss, but there's all these teams that if they lose a game, they're gonna get jumped, and it's just I would love to see it happen. The Vandy game versus Bama, the strength of schedule, there's a point in time where you just need to lock in and not care about that. Like, worry about week to week football and stop worrying about what the committee thinks. Oh, you're not this team. Oh, why are we listening to the outside noise? Oh, the strength of schedule. If anything, strength of schedule, we should be talking about Indiana in the top 5. Like,
yeah, right.
Crazy.
Man, it's interesting. You just got to do your job and go out there and play the game. And to be honest, man, I'm of the opinion that like every conference is top heavy. It's always been that way. The SEC, it's so dominant, so dominant. You know, quite literally, there was like 5 good teams in the SEC for a lot of years, and people act like it was this powerhouse because they kept winning national championships. And I made the argument of like, listen, you might have the best team in college football. It doesn't necessarily mean you have the best conference in college football. I think we get that mistaken sometimes. Just because the best team is in your conference does not necessarily mean you have the best conference. Every conference is top heavy. The Big Ten, you stem from Ohio State, Oregon, all the way down to, you know, the crappiest teams like Purdue. And then it's the same concept all across the board. Everyone's got top. There's just sometimes, you know, some conferences have more teams that are like ranked, but I don't know. I think it's interesting. Who is one of the shockers this year for you, Mike? That surprised you, whether not necessarily in the college football playoff scheme, but just in college football in general? Who's one of the shockers?
I don't know if it's a shocker, but I feel like the Gamecocks have hung in there really well. I love South Carolina. They're just like that team where it's like that, like them or Georgia Tech. And I know they're not really ranked, but it's just those teams are like the ones that just hang in there. They'll give you a run for your money. It's like, don't count them out. Even against Alabama. Like, I don't know what it is with the Cocks, but like they're just something else.
Dude, I'm right there with you. That's what I was going to say. I've got South Carolina. They have thoroughly impressed me. They get out recruited in the SEC, and they go up against the Giants and such with that concept, and they find a way to compete. And I think it's awesome. They're well coached. The other school I was going to say out west is Arizona State. Their turnaround that they've had from last year to this year, their coach has them playing at a very high level, but they're kind of sneaking by with nobody really paying attention to them. They're a 2-loss program, potentially going to win a Big 12 championship or compete for one. And that could be dangerous, man, because they're playing extremely high-level football. And if it weren't for their field goal kicker, they'd probably be a 1-loss team because they missed a couple of chip shots. So, like, I don't know, Arizona State, I would say that's one of my sleepers right now, is just keep an eye on them because everyone's talking about BYU and Colorado over in the Big 12. Well, Arizona State's kind of sneaking up there without anybody even talking about them, but they're doing their thing too. They've kind of surprised me. So
yeah, BYU is pretty obvious.
Yeah. So going into the next, before we meet again, we're going to meet you and I. Will do one more episode before the college football playoff actually starts and gets rocking and rolling. What do you think we'll be talking about from now until like 3 or 4 weeks from now, Mike? What's the storylines you think that we might see coming up from there? And I have my own that I'll say too. But I want to hear yours too.
As a fan, like everyone else, we want chaos. It's just and this is probably not a prediction, but I would love to see, like we talked about, or at least I said, let's say Notre Dame loses to Army this week. Army just comes in, that gritty team off a bye week. Maybe they catch them. You would see I would love to see the flip-flop. Maybe Boise loses. We see a couple teams like the Gamecocks make the playoffs. But no, I think what's going to make sense is the top teams are going to get in. Maybe, just maybe, you'll have like one team slip up and lose that important game like Georgia, Bama, Penn State. One of those teams, big name, they're going to blow it. I don't know who it's going to be, but that's what I think is going to happen. There's going to be like, oh, we expect all these teams to make it. One team's not going to, and it's going to be a shocker. That's what I'm thinking.
Dude, so here's to go along with that. I think there's going to be some chaos that happens in the championship games. I think the SEC championship is going to be important because you're potentially looking at a 2-loss program going in there and having to save their season for a championship, and then they lose. Or let's just say Texas gets in and they lose a SEC championship, and all of a sudden now it's chaos across the board because everyone's got 2 losses, right? I also think, I don't want to say it, I don't want to jinx it, but Ohio State still has to get through Indiana. They have to get through Michigan, and then they'll get to a Big Ten championship. I would love to see them come out of this unscathed. I don't expect that, though. I expect to see Ohio State with another loss somewhere down the line. And I hate saying that because I'm a Buckeyes fan, but I don't think they get through there 3-0. I don't know where it is. I just don't want it to be Michigan. I would rather Ohio State get through those 2 games and then lose the Big Ten championship to Oregon than lose to Michigan. Because if they lose to Michigan, I think that's where another set of chaos erupts in the college football playoff rankings and everything goes down. But dude, tell me how cool this would be. Let's say Ohio State doesn't win the Big Ten championship, so the Ohio State has to host their first round, right? First round of the playoff. What if it was an Ohio State Alabama or Ohio State Georgia game in Columbus? Like, doesn't that sound sick to you? Like, this type of stuff is what excites me about this playoff.
I love it. No, I feel like I love the analogy. I feel like if Ohio State sees Oregon in the Big Ten championship, I believe they can catch them. The once before early in the season, they can get them. I don't know. It's the whole, like you said, the championships are what's going to determine chaos. That's going to be something crazy.
It's going to be wild. I actually do believe Ohio State can beat them on a neutral field. It's just, I would rather than beat them in the national championship. I don't care if they necessarily lose a Big Ten championship so long as they get a chance at the playoff. But, man, I'm looking forward to it. Mike, we'll be chatting a little bit more in a couple of weeks as we get ready for the college football playoff. So we'll have more information to go off of, and we'll do our special there. It's going to be super, super cool. Remind everybody where they can find you, Mike.
Yes, my socials, Football Reality Podcast, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, everywhere. It's been a pleasure. It's been a blast. Just talk some college football with Shane. It's awesome stuff, man.
Heck yeah. I'll put the links here in the description so you guys can go follow Mike on his channels. And then, like we said, we'll be back in about a month or a little bit less as we get geared up for the college football playoff. You guys take care. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of my show. Now, if you could go and do me a favor, head over to iTunes, give me 5 stars, and leave me a review. It would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your support.